Mother left instructions, the man on the phone said. There's a property in Edinburgh. Go there. Use her name at the front desk. They'll know what to do. I was standing in the parking lot of the funeral home in Oakville when he said it. I hadn't even taken off my coat yet. The service had ended 40 minutes earlier. 14 people showed up, which was more than I expected and fewer than she deserved. My mother was a retired corrections officer. 31 years at Grand Valley Institution for Women in Kitchener. She drove the same Honda Civic for 12 years. She bought her groceries at No Frills and kept a coupon envelope in her purse right up until the end. She had no vacation property. She didn't talk about travel. I didn't even know she had a passport until I was sorting through her things the week after she died. I should back up. Her name was Eileen. She was 67. She died of a stroke in her apartment on a Tuesday, and I found out from her building superintendent, who called me because I was listed as her emergency contact, and her phone had been going to voicemail for 2 days. I drove the 4 hours from Ottawa in a state that wasn't quite grief yet, more like disorientation. The kind where you keep doing things just to have something to do. The apartment was tidy. That was the first thing I noticed. Not performatively tidy, the way someone cleans before guests arrive, just lived in and ordered. Dishes in the rack, shoes lined up by the door, a grocery list on the fridge that stopped mid-sentence. Oats, spinach, the good yogurt, and then nothing. I sat at her kitchen table for a long time before I started going through anything. My brother called that evening. He lives in Calgary now, has for almost a decade. I can drive out, he said, if there's stuff to sort. I have it, I told him. He didn't push. He never does. 2 days later, I was at the funeral home finalizing arrangements when my phone rang. Unknown number, but it showed a UK country code. I almost didn't answer. I almost sent it to voicemail the way I had been doing with everyone else for 3 days, but something made me step outside and pick up. The man spoke quietly. His English was precise, the kind that comes from long habit rather than birth. Is this Fiona? He asked. I said yes. My name is Alistair Graham, he said. I was a colleague of your mother's, a long time ago. I didn't know the name. My mother hadn't talked much about colleagues, past or present. She was someone who kept her working life in one room and her personal life in another and rarely opened the door between them. She left instructions, he said. There's a property in Edinburgh. Go there. Use her name at the front desk. They'll know what to do. He gave me an address. He gave me a phone number to call ahead with. And then, before I could ask anything, he said, She was a steady woman, your mother. The steadiest person I ever worked alongside. And he hung up. I stood in that parking lot for a long time. The funeral home had a Canadian flag out front and a dried flower wreath on the door, and the whole thing felt suddenly very small. I didn't know what my mother had been. Not really. I thought I did. I thought she was a corrections officer who grew herbs on her windowsill and watched British procedurals and drove slowly in the left lane. But she had a passport with stamps I hadn't counted yet. My brother called again that evening. He got straight to it the way he does. Did she leave anything? He asked. There it was. Not grief, not yet. Assessment. The estate is pretty simple, I told him, which was true, as far as I knew. I just mean the apartment, the car, if there's anything to divide. I haven't finished going through things. He exhaled. I'm not trying to be a vulture, Fiona. I just want to know where things stand. I believed him, mostly. My brother isn't a bad person. He's a person who has made a series of choices that have left him always slightly behind, always slightly stretched, and who has a habit of looking at other people's stability the way you look at a warm window from a cold street. He borrowed money from our mother twice that I know of. Possibly more. She never mentioned it to me. I only found out because I found the transfers in her bank statements when I was organizing her paperwork. I didn't tell him about the call from Edinburgh. The next morning, I looked at the passport. I had found it in a shoebox in the back of her bedroom closet, the kind of place you put something you don't want to explain. Not hidden exactly, just tucked. The passport itself was current, renewed 4 years ago, and the pages were full. Edinburgh appeared 6 times over 10 years. Twice there were stamps from Dublin and once from Amsterdam. She had told me she'd been to a corrections conference in Toronto on at least 2 of those dates. I remember because I'd offered to drive her and she'd said no. She was fine, she'd take the train. She hadn't taken the train. I booked a flight to Edinburgh 3 days after the funeral. I didn't tell my brother. I told him I had some legal things to finalize and that I'd be in touch. That was true enough. I should tell you a little about what I do. I work in housing policy for a federal department in Ottawa. I review proposals, assess community impact, write reports that go into binders that go onto shelves. It's not glamorous, but it's careful work, and I'm good at it. My mother always said I was like my father in that way, methodical, though she never said it like a compliment exactly, more like a fact. My father died when I was 11. Heart condition he hadn't known about. He was a school teacher in Kitchener, and he coached minor hockey on weekends, and he was the loudest person in any room he was in. My mother was the quietest. I used to think they were opposites. Now, I'm not sure that's right. The flight to Edinburgh was 8 hours. I brought her passport with me, and a copy of the death certificate and my own ID, and I spent most of the flight trying to understand what I was walking toward. My brother texted somewhere over the Atlantic. Any update on the estate? I put my phone face down on the tray table. Edinburgh in November is cold in a way that feels intentional. The stone buildings hold the gray the way Canadian cities hold snow, like they've always known it was coming and have made their peace. The address Alistair had given me was in the new town, which isn't new at all, a Georgian terrace with black railings and a brass plate beside the door. The plate had a name on it I didn't recognize. I gave the woman at the front desk my mother's name. She looked at me for a moment. Then she picked up a phone and spoke quietly and said, "Yes, I'll send her through." I was shown to a private room. Dark wood, tall windows, the smell of tea that had been sitting too long. A man came in a few minutes later. Older, maybe mid-60s. Cardigan, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He shook my hand and said how sorry he was for my loss and meant it, which you can tell when someone means it. "Your mother spoke about you often," he said. "I didn't know she spoke about me to anyone here." "She was a private person," he said, "but she was proud." He opened a folder. Inside were documents I wasn't prepared for. My mother had been involved with a registered charitable foundation since 2009, not a donor. A founder. She had co-established it with 3 other people, 2 Canadians, and 1 Scottish woman I had never heard of. The foundation provided legal support and transitional housing assistance to women leaving the correctional system, women who had no safe place to go when they got out, women the system released into nothing. I stared at the documents. "She ran this," I said. It wasn't quite a question. "She helped design it," the man said, "and she contributed consistently over the years. Funding, yes, but also expertise. She consulted on intake procedures, on how to structure the first 30 days of transition. That was her specialty." "She never told me." "She wouldn't have," he said gently. It wasn't modesty exactly. She felt that talking about it changed the work, made it about her instead of about the women it was for. He slid another document toward me, a financial summary. The foundation currently managed assets of just over $4 million. Endowment contributions, government grants, private donations over 15 years. There was a Canadian account as well, held with a trust company in Toronto. She had designated me as her successor trustee. If I accepted the role, I would be responsible for overseeing operations in Canada and maintaining the partnership with the Edinburgh office. $4 million, I said quietly. "It is not a large foundation," the man said, "but it is an effective one. The outcomes data is in the supplementary folder." She lived in a 1-bedroom apartment. Yes. I looked at the numbers again. Her salary as a corrections officer, 31 years of it. She had never bought a cottage, never replaced her car until she had to, never went on cruises or renovated her kitchen. "Sheep didn't live like this was sitting somewhere," I said. "She lived the way she chose to," he said. "She said once that the money meant more where it went than it would ever mean in her life." He handed me a sealed envelope, my name on the front in her handwriting. I recognized it immediately. She wrote her 7s with a crossbar, an old habit. I used to tease her about it when I was a kid. My phone buzzed on the table. My brother, I let it ring. When the man stepped out to give me a moment, I opened the envelope. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten, dated 3 months earlier. She had known, then, or had been preparing as if she might. She didn't open with sentiment. That wasn't her. Fiona, it began. I want to tell you the reason I didn't tell you sooner. It isn't what you might think. She went on to explain that when she started working at the institution in her late 20s, she kept seeing the same pattern. Women would finish their sentences and leave with almost nothing. No stable housing. No support network. Sometimes their families had moved on or cut them off. The recidivism rate for women without stable housing in the first 90 days of release was something she had watched play out over and over. Not statistics. People. Women she had spoken to every day for years. She hadn't known how to fix it inside the system, so she started looking outside it. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to think it was remarkable, she wrote. It isn't. It's just what you do when you see a problem and you have some capacity to address it. You address it, you don't wait for someone to give you permission. She wrote about a woman she'd met on her first year of the job, early 20s, 2 kids in foster care, no one to pick her up on release day. My mother had driven her to a shelter herself on her own time in the Civic. That woman was now a registered practical nurse in Barrie. My mother had stayed in loose touch. You don't advertise that kind of thing, she wrote. You just do it and keep going. Near the end of the letter, she mentioned my brother. He will struggle with this, she wrote. Not because he is greedy, but because he has spent a long time feeling like he came up short. Some of that is his own doing and some of it isn't, and I love him the same either way. But I chose you for this because you see clearly and you stay steady. That's not a slight against him, it's a fact about you. Don't let the money make you complicated. It isn't yours. You're just the person looking after it. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope and sat with it for a moment. Then I picked up my phone and called my brother back. You're hard to get a hold of, he said. I know. I'm sorry. So what's the situation? The estate. It's more complicated than I expected, I said. Complicated how? Did she have debt? No, the opposite. Silence. How much opposite? He asked. I told him there was a trust. I told him it was connected to a charitable foundation. I told him I needed time to understand it fully before I could explain it. How much are we talking about? 4 million. He didn't say anything for a long moment. And it's a charity, he said finally. A foundation, yes. And she never told you? No. Another pause. So what does that mean for us? For our share? There it was, the word that tells you everything. She designated me as trustee, I said carefully. The assets belong to the foundation. She had $4 million and she gave it to strangers. To women who had nowhere to go, I said. Women she worked with for 30 years. His voice changed. Not anger yet, just a kind of tightening. I borrowed money from her, Fiona, twice. She never made me feel bad about it. But apparently she was running a foundation the whole time and she picked you. I know. That doesn't bother you. It makes sense, I said, which was true. She knew how I work. He was quiet again. I'm going to call a lawyer, he said. I want to understand my rights here. That's fair, I told him. I stayed in Edinburgh 2 more days. I met with the foundation's staff. I reviewed the intake reports and the outcomes data and the cases that were currently active. 43 women in transitional housing at that moment. 11 had secured stable employment since the intake date. 2 were in college. 1 had regained custody of her children. My mother had built that. On my last evening, I walked along Princes Street in the dark. The castle lit up on the hill and thought about all the Sundays I'd sat in her kitchen eating toast while she did her crossword. And I'd assumed I knew the shape of her life. I flew home to Ottawa. My brother had retained a lawyer in Calgary by the time I landed. His challenge came in the form of a letter to the trust company in Toronto. He argued that our mother's estate had not been properly disclosed, that the foundation represented withheld assets that should have been distributed to her heirs, and that the designation of a single daughter as trustee reflected undue influence. He wasn't wrong to ask. I understood that. The law allows it. But the foundation had been registered since 2009. The contributions were documented. The trust structure was legal, held under both Canadian and Scottish law, and reviewed by two separate firms when it was established. I hired an estate lawyer in Ottawa. Older woman, 2 decades of experience, the kind of calm that comes from having seen families fracture over smaller things. She read through everything and looked up at me. "Your mother was thorough," she said. "She was a corrections officer," I said. "She understood what happens when you don't document things." The process took 4 months. My brother's lawyer filed for full financial disclosure of the foundation's assets and argued that the trust should be dissolved and proceeds distributed as part of the estate. Our lawyer responded with the original registration documents, 15 years of annual reports filed with the Canada Revenue Agency under registered charity status, and the legal opinion confirming that the trust existed independently of the estate and had for over a decade. The judge reviewed it over 3 weeks. My brother and I did not speak during that time. That part was harder than the legal process. We had grown up in the same house, eaten the same meals, sat through the same long drives to visit our grandmother in Windsor. We were not close the way some siblings are close, but we were not estranged. This was the first time there had been something sharp between us, and I felt it. The ruling came on a Wednesday morning. I was at my kitchen table in Ottawa when my lawyer called. "The claim is dismissed," she said. "The foundation is recognized as a registered charitable organization with independent legal standing. The trust designation to you as successor trustee is upheld." I said thank you and hung up and sat there for a few minutes. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like the end of an argument I hadn't wanted to have. My brother called 2 weeks later. I answered on the second ring. "I was wrong to file," he said. "I want you to know that." "You had the right to ask," I said. "That's not the same as being right to do it." He sounded tired, not defeated, just quieter than usual. "I kept thinking, she chose you because she liked you more," he said. "Because I was the one who borrowed money and didn't have a career like yours and didn't visit as much. And maybe some of that's true. But after I read through all of it, what she actually built, I don't think that's the reason." "She knew I'd keep it going," I said. "That's all." "She should have told me what she was doing," he said. "Yeah," I said. "I think you're right." He exhaled slowly. "Those women, the ones the foundation helps." "Yes." "Did you know Mom drove one of them somewhere when she was just starting out?" "Before the foundation. Just in her car." "I just found that out," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "That's her. Right, that's exactly her." His voice had something different in it now, closer to grief than anything he'd shown before. I flew to Calgary a month later. His apartment was on the second floor of a house in Inglewood, a nice enough neighborhood, but the place itself was clearly held together by intention rather than ease. Boxes in the corner he hadn't unpacked, a bike he'd bought for a fitness phase that hadn't lasted. We sat at his kitchen table with coffee, and I didn't pretend the past year hadn't happened. "I'm not here to manage you," I said. "Good," he said, "because I'd refuse." "I know." I smiled slightly. "But the foundation has a provision for family stabilization. It's structured. Document. It can provide debt support or transitional assistance if someone in the founding family faces genuine hardship. Mom included it." He looked at me carefully. "She included it for me." "Probably," I said. He looked at his coffee cup. "With conditions." "With accountability," I said. "Financial counseling. A plan, not a blank check. You'd be watching my spending." "I'd be overseeing a process," I said, "the same way I oversee the foundation." He thought about that. "I don't want to be a case file." "You're my brother," I said. "There's a difference." We talked for 2 hours. By the end, we had an outline, not a formal agreement yet, but the beginning of one. He agreed to meet with a financial counselor. I agreed to provide documentation to support a debt repayment plan over 4 years. No lump sum, no shortcuts, just structure. When I stood to leave, he walked me to the door and we stood there for a moment in the awkward way that families do when they are trying to decide whether to hug. She really had $4 million, he said. She really did. He shook his head slowly, and she drove that car until it made that noise. Until it made the noise, I agreed. He laughed once. Genuine, the kind he doesn't do on purpose. The foundation continues exactly as she designed it. Quarterly distributions. Intake reviews every 6 months. We've partnered with 3 additional transition houses since I took over, 1 in Hamilton, 1 in Saskatoon, 1 in Moncton. The Edinburgh office sends updates every quarter. The woman from Alistair's team emails me on the anniversary of my mother's death each year with a brief note about the outcomes data. It is not sentimental, it is thorough. I think she would have approved. My brother has completed 2 years of his plan. He's paid down most of the debt. He sold some things he didn't need. He calls me more often now, not about money, just to talk. That's new. That part I didn't expect. Last spring, we drove to Kitchener together. Her apartment had long been cleared and leased to someone else. We didn't have a destination exactly. We just drove past the building, past the institution where she worked for over 3 decades, past the small Catholic church she attended the last few years of her life, though she never really talked about faith in any direct way. My brother was quiet most of the drive. I thought she was small, he said at one point. Just said it to the windshield, not to me. I know, I said. Not small, like I disrespected her. Just, I thought I understood the size of her life, and I had the dimensions wrong the whole time. I didn't say anything. There wasn't much to add. On the way back, I thought about the letter she had left me, about the line that had stayed with me the longest, not the part about the money or the foundation or the women she had helped. The part that said, you don't wait for someone to give you permission. You just address it and keep going. She had never needed recognition to feel real. She'd never needed anyone to see the full picture. She built something genuine in private and trusted that it would outlast her, which it will. I used to think strength had to be announced somehow, that if you were doing something significant, people around you would know. My mother made 31 years of daily, unglamorous work inside a broken system, and when the system couldn't give her what she needed, she built a structure outside it, quietly, carefully, over 15 years, and she kept it to herself, not out of secrecy, but out of clarity. She knew what happened when you made help about yourself instead of about the people receiving it. She left no medals on the wall, she left instructions. And somewhere tonight, a woman who has just finished a sentence she didn't deserve, who is standing outside a door she is afraid to walk through, will find a bed that is already made and a plan that is already waiting. She will not know my mother's name. She doesn't need to. That's exactly how my mother wanted it. I keep coming back to the grocery list on her fridge. Oats, spinach, the good yogurt. And then it just stopped. That's the image I return to more than the passport, more than the documents in Edinburgh, more than the number the banker read out to me in that quiet room. Because that list is who she was every single day. Careful, deliberate. Finishing what she started and not spending energy on what she didn't need. For a long time, I thought I understood my mother. I thought her life was small because her apartment was small, because her car was old, because she never talked about herself in rooms where other people were talking about themselves. I had the dimensions wrong. I had confused quietness with limitation. Those are not the same thing, and I should have known better. What she built over 15 years. The foundation, the partnerships, the intake procedures she designed based on 3 decades of watching women walk out of a broken system into nothing. That didn't come from luck or inheritance or being in the right place. It came from paying attention when it would have been easier not to. It came from deciding that what she saw was her problem to address, not someone else's. That's a kind of moral clarity I'm still learning. She had it early, and she kept it quietly, and she never once used it to make herself feel superior to anyone. My brother challenged the trust because he felt passed over, and I don't think that was simply greed. I think it was years of accumulated hurt looking for a legal address. What I've come to understand is that cause and effect in families work slowly. The choices my mother made to help him twice without judgment, to designate me as trustee, not as a reward but as a practical decision, to build something structured instead of leaving chaos. Those choices had consequences that played out over years, not days. He didn't see the full picture because she hadn't shown it to him. That's a real failure on her part, and I've made my peace with it. But the outcome wasn't cruelty, it was architecture. The hardest part of taking on the foundation wasn't the paperwork. It was the moment I realized I had to think clearly under pressure that was genuinely personal. When my brother filed, when the lawyers got involved, when it would have been so easy to dissolve everything and split the proceeds and never have another difficult conversation, I had to figure out what I actually believed, not what was comfortable, what was true. That kind of thinking doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from practice, from the habit of asking yourself the harder question instead of the easier one. My mother had that habit. I had to discover I'd inherited it. She left me a standard, not a fortune. And honestly, a standard is harder to hold than money. Money you can spend down. A standard you have to keep choosing every time you're tired, every time it's inconvenient, every time someone you love is standing on the other side of it looking hurt. I'm still learning what steady looks like in my own life, but I know what it looked like in hers. 31 years, a Civic with a noise she ignored until she couldn't, coupons in a worn envelope, and somewhere tonight a woman who has just walked out of a system that didn't have room for her, stepping into a place that does. That's what she built. That's what I'm keeping.